This is NDTV, and you're watching NDTV 24/7.
Hello and welcome to The Big Fight. It's a momentous landmark that has almost gone completely unnoticed. 20 years of liberalization, 20 years of reform. Are we better off? Are we worse off? Should we have more reforms now? Less? Should we go forward or back? All sorts of important questions, but somehow no one's really turning their attention to them. So here on The Big Fight, I can say we have assembled perhaps the most illustrious panel ever to sit in a room to discuss the subject of reform. And I'm going to just quickly rattle off some of the names. N.K. Singh, I think it would be fair to say you were one of the fathers of the entire reform process, so it's great to have you with us. Nilotpal Basu, who's disagreed with a lot of what's happened, great to have you with us. Jay Panda, one of the people who should be presumably leading the next wave of reforms if we are to get one, so wonderful that you're here with us. Dr. Vandana Shiva has been a critic of a lot of what has happened in the name of globalization. Tarun Das, somebody else who was one of the architects of the entire reform process and certainly from the industry side has been really pushing it in a major fashion. So it's great to have you with us. Dr. Jayati Ghosh, Professor of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Surjit Bhalla, fantastic to have you with us. Gopal Jain, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court. And John Elliott, correspondent with Fortune magazine, who's been writing about reforms and actually one of the people who's expressed a certain amount of surprise as to why India is not celebrating a lot more. John?
Absolutely. I think it's slightly the same sort of mood as it was in 1997, after 50 years of independence, when people didn't seem to know what to celebrate. The country seemed to be so conscious of what hadn't happened. And I sense the same mood now. Although there's been all the obvious things, everybody's so aware of how much has not been done and how awful some things have got. Look at the news from Karnataka in the last few days.
So in some ways it's made life better, in some ways it's made life worse.
Enormously better for 300 million people maybe, and enormously better in terms of industry, investing abroad, in terms of growth, but a huge raft of the country not benefited.
There's a downside as well.
Big downside.
Nilotpal, would you agree with that? There's a big downside?
I think this mellowed mood in the country is actually not unsurprising because these captures because the soft underbelly of the whole reform process is exploding and really smiling at us, mocking at us. And he was talking about 300 million people, but I think a lot many more are today pushed below the poverty level.
Thanks to reform.
You have deaths of farmers committing suicides. You have so many other things which the common man, the Aam Aadmi,
is been better off without
and of course the corruption and where you see people make millions. I mean, at the cost of
okay, Surjit Bhalla.
Large number of people.
No, I didn't quite understand what John said. He said that basically what has happened in Karnataka the last few days illustrates the bad side of reforms. Did I understand that right?
If you take the fact that corruption has increased during the last 20 years, and that is a major problem, and that land is a problem that has not been reformed, then mining and Karnataka come straight into play.
And I think what that illustrates is, in my view, just the opposite. It is a success of reforms, which means it doesn't mean that everything is solved. It just means that the very fact that this thing is now a big issue and the chief minister has been removed. Can you imagine that happening prior to 1991? Corruption has certainly happened, has certainly increased. Are we to now think that we would prefer the corruption prior to 91 to the corruption now? In other words, I think corruption has become a lot more efficient, a lot more transparent, a lot more being caught, which was not done under the Soviet system that we prevailed.
He's laughing uproariously. I don't want to turn to this entire corruption issue, but overall, N.K. Singh, is India much better off thanks to reform? Is there any doubt about that?
Well, let me say this, that I don't think that even the worst critics would doubt the fact that in the last 20 years of economic reform, there have been enormous progress. We are not talking about
redistributing it, sitting right next to you.
Well, we are not talking about redistributing poverty. We are talking about redistributing wealth. And I think that the context of the dialogue has therefore changed. Of course, nobody is supporting crony capitalism, which has really led to this kind of stuff, which John talked about, because partly we may have freed up consumers in terms of enlarging the bouquet of choice, in terms of licensing, trade, whole lot, but we haven't freed up the factors of production, namely land, mines. We haven't
So you're
freed up
saying
a whole lot.
you're saying in a sense similar to what John is saying, it's because we haven't had more reforms that the bad effects of the reform are actually being
and
felt.
very poor regulation. Wherever you have even deregulated, for instance in telecom, you have had the horrible instance of regulatory capture, which is one of the classic reasons that economists will give you should avoid when opening up of any sector.
NDTV's cricket app, Android and iPhone. Fastest scorecard, special analysis, and much more. Download free. ndtv.com/apps.